So this is going to be my review of Daredevil Yellow. For those who aren't aware, Daredevil Yellow is part of the series that Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale did in the early mid 2000s, centered around several Marvel characters and kind of doing another retelling of their origin stories, but kind of like in their own thing where you could still see it in its own you could still see it part of the continuity in a way, especially with Daredevil. The three that had come out were Hulk Gray, Spider-Man Blue, and of course Daredevil Yellow, which is again a retelling of the early years, but it's not an exact total origin story. If anything, they're actually about the character's perspective to their lovers, to their early lovers. With Hulk, it's Betty Ross. I almost said Betty Brant. With Spider-Man, it's him looking back at Gwen Stacy, and with Daredevil, it's looking back at Karen Page. Of course, at this time, Karen Page had been killed by Bullseye in a story done by Kevin Smith. So yeah, this is Daredevil. Matt Murdock looking back at his life with his early days with seeing Karen Page and being with Karen Page in the early days as Daredevil, back when he wore the yellow suit. This is a really good comic. And I know it's kind of odd to say that after, this is Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, especially Jeff Loeb, who had done, his late work has not been up to par with what he had. But this, I would say, is as good as Batman Long Halloween and Dark Victory. I would say that this is just as good, and Tim Sale's artwork is beautiful as always. He always has this great noir feel, but in here, he has this great noir watercolor feel to him, and it especially shows in his comics here, because, yeah, I feel like it really works, especially with Daredevil. So, in this comic, they do, like I said, they do the origin of Matt Murdock a little bit differently, in that in here, Daredevil was already in college when his father was killed, as opposed to, in most comics, his father was killed when he was still young. And they did do an interesting spin with the yellow costume. In here, the yellow costume he wears is actually his father's robe that he wore after a boxing tournament. It was his robes that he wore after every time he fought. So he stitched that into his suit, and I was like, that's really cool. That gives a lot of validity to the yellow costume. And not to make fun of the yellow costume, but there's a reason why it kind of gets overlooked for a reason. Yeah, we can all kind of admit that it's not the most, eye-pleasing costume. It's certainly, I'm not trying to badmouth it, but it's not like the most... When you think of Daredevil costumes, you usually think of the red suit, and you do see the red suit in here because it's Daredevil looking back at his life with Karen. And you do see that it's him, writing... It's all these narrations you see are him writing letters in this comic. It's him writing letters to Karen after she's died, and it's his coping mechanism to do so. And I thought that was really cool. But again, going back to the yellow costume, there's kind of it's not exactly the most visually pleasing costume. And I do like the yellow costume, but I will admit, yeah, I'm glad they kind of skip on that in both Netflix and in the movie. Again, but I can understand why it's skipped over. I like it, and to see it in here and to give it the new backstory of making it a part of it's him trying to cope with his father's death. I think that's really cool. Now, there isn't really an overarching plot per se, and it's the last issue kind of feels tacked on if anything else. If anything, it's the two main things in the story, but the main overriding thing is him and his early days before he before him and Karen became an item. But the other two minor plots are that, one, Daredevil is looking for the people who murdered his father, and it's two hitmen, one man called the Fixer, and another guy who was obsessed with eating pistachio nuts. And I know if you watch Milo Murphy's Law, the new Disney cartoon, there's a whole thing with time travelers trying to save pistachios, and I couldn't help but laugh a little bit. It's a serious comic, and how that storyline ends in this comic is pretty sad, and it really just shows Matt that, yeah, This is not justice. But at the same time, when I started reading this, I just started I was watching an episode of Milo Murphy's Law that kind of reveals the two time travelers and what they want with the pistachio nuts. I was like, I'm a terrible human being. Anyway, getting back on track, the other main story arc, and this one is finished also in the 5th issue. It's centered around them with Daredevil coming in contact with the Owl. If you guys remember, the Owl was one of Daredevil's major villains before Kingpin, and they do kind of mention Kingpin in here. They don't outright say his name, but if you can tell from the, you can tell that all the little machinations are, of course, Wilson Fisk, even though they don't say it yet. But it was cool to see the Owl. It was really cool because for the longest time before Kingpin and Matt had their huge rivalry, the Owl was kind of Matt's arch nemesis, really. The Owl was kind of his big villain for a while, and it was cool to see him in here. And yeah, we do get to see other villains. We get to see a quick cameo of the Matador, another classic Daredevil villain. We also get to see Daredevil fighting Electro, which again, oh my god, especially in that issue, it really shows how fantastic of a artist Tim Sale is. All of his colors just pop in these beautiful just spreads of artwork, especially when Daredevil's going through the city or fighting the Owl, or these wide patch spreads of him just swinging through the city. There's some also beautiful colors of when he is going toe-to-toe with Electro, and it does kind of involve a minor story of the Fantastic Four becoming, clients for Nelson and Murdoch. And god damn, does Tim Sale does a great work of coloring the Fantastic Four. But anyway, like I said, those are the two main plots. And the other villain that does show up is the Purple Man at the end. And that kind of revolves around Karen being kidnapped. And this was it did start with the Owl, but it also goes further with the Kingpin, almost said Kingpin. It goes further with Kilgrave. And it's a very cool comic of how, again, showing off Tim Sale's artwork of how brightly colored the Purple Man is, and when he speaks to someone, they get shaded with purple a bit, and I was like, oh, that's a nice touch. But yeah, the other main thing in this comic is the whole thing between Foggy and Nelson's rivalry towards, trying to earn Karen's heart. Because here's the big thing. They both love Karen. They're both in love with Karen. Both Foggy and Matt are in love with Karen. But the problem is that they love each other just as much. It's not like in a CW show where someone would be like, "Oh, I'm in love with her. I'm in love with her too. We should hate each other even though we've been through so much shit. I agree. I hate you too." Yeah. This isn't a CW comic. This isn't a CW episode. This is a well-written comic. And that's the thing, is that Foggy and Matt come to blows with each other about this in a very mature way. And yeah, Foggy's hurt, and I feel bad for Foggy because I've been in Foggy's shoes. Getting rejected for your best friend is not fucking fun. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys and girls, ladies and gentlemen out there, can agree with me on that. It's not fun. So yeah, we've all kind of been in Foggy's shoes at one point. But again, they do handle how this comes to be between them, because yeah, they still care about each other just as much as they love Karen. So I really dug that. I really enjoyed that. This is such a well-written comic. Jeff Loeb, even though, like I said earlier, that Jeff Loeb has not been up to par as of late in his later comics, especially his Red Hulk run. I will say that this in here, I think this is some of his best work since Long Halloween and Dark Victory. I think this is some of the best writing, and I really want to read Spider-Man Blue, because apparently Spider-Man Blue is the best of the three. So I know that Captain America White is being written right now. I think it's only been one issue out, and the others are still in the process. I don't know exactly the whole thing there, but yeah, Captain America White is the fourth one. Ugh, I'm tongue-tied, and they're still working on it. But yeah, if hopefully it's as good as the other three. But like I said, Spider-Man Blue is apparently the best out of the three so far. So I'll definitely be checking that out, along with Hulk Gray. So, yeah. Daredevil Yellow is also a fun comic because the other thing I forgot to mention is that this, like, if you guys remember early 60s, like, Kirby, Kirby, Ditko, Lee era Daredevil, was that it was very, Daredevil was a very swashbuckling, very fun-loving, he was this big adventurer type character, and of course we know him better as the darker character from the Miller era comics. It's not to say that's bad, but it was nice to see that we get to see a nice little blend of the Miller comics with the, and still have that kind of swashbuckling adventure type character that Matt was in his early days in the Lee Ditko era. So I thought that was really cool. Again, not to bash Frank Miller's Daredevil run, because it's fucking brilliant. So that's why, but like I said, it does have a lot of the elements in here of the Miller run, but at the same time, it does still feel like a 60s era, it still feels like something you could have seen written by Lee and Ditko, in a way, with a Miller spin to it. I know, it's really weird. So yeah, if you're a Daredevil fan, or just a fan of, if you really want to read a good comic book, and if you want to get into Daredevil, yeah, I'd say this. I'd say pick this up. If you're looking, yeah, I would highly recommend this. Well, if you really want to understand it, especially why he loves Karen so much, you may have to pick up a few other comics. But on the other hand, it does kind of, even if it does all in flashbacks, it still gives you a pretty good reason of why it conveys why Matt loves Karen Page so much. So, yeah, I would actually recommend this. If you're looking to get into Daredevil comics, I would actually suggest picking up Daredevil Yellow. Yes, it is kind of a romance story and a retelling of the origins, but it does the two angles so well and blends them together of how Matt can move forward after his father's death and finding, some semblance of hope in Karen, as well as at the same time moving past Karen's death. It's a beautiful comic. Tim Sale's art is fantastic in here, and Loeb is on point in the writing. I highly recommend this. So once again, guys, you guys tell me, what did you guys think of Daredevil Yellow? Did you guys like it? Did you guys hate it? Comment below, let me know. And once again, hope you all enjoyed this review, and I will see you guys later.